Exceedingly dull because they were so formal. So I and my friend who was with me, we discovered there was a way to break the ice, which was to turn the banquets into poetry readings. So they became wonderful occasions, and everybody got up of course, sometimes without translations, just reciting a poem in Chinese or in English, and it was great. And there was a Chinese poet who was at many of these banquets, Mr. B, and he made a translation of this poem, so that when I read this poem at these banquets, he would be able to get up and read the translation, so people would understand what was going on. But I thought, what a wonderful language Chinese is, because it would take me maybe a minute and a half to read this poem, and then he would read his translation in about 20 seconds. Incredible that you could have such a compact language. And I complimented him on that. I said, that's great that you have a language like that. He said, well, it's true. However, he said, I must point out that I have reduced your poem of 18 lines to a poem of 6 lines. He said, however, I assure you, it is in no way inferior to the original. And then And then I said, well, let me have a translation of your translation, will you? And he translated his literally into English. And I don't have it here. I would read it. It's not bad, actually. But I took it as a kind of criticism of this poem, going on too long, too many details. He just got the emotional essence out of it. Anyway, I didn't mean to stop on this poem too much. Get back to Williams. He said, a little later in the day, he said, well, so you were brought up in Illinois, were you? Of course, he knew I wasn't brought up in Illinois. This was his criticism. I said, no, I was brought up in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Oh. You're writing about childhood in Illinois, and you were brought up. He didn't say that, but that's what he was thinking, obviously. And he said, probably in Rhode Island you played the cornstalk violins out in the cornfield. You knew how to make the cornstalk violins. And at that point I said, yeah. But but to myself I said, no, I have never. I just imagined the cornstalk violins. So he was kind of saying, well, that's okay. That's poetry, but there's another kind of poetry too, that's based on experiencing things. And so I was living on the Lower East Side in Manhattan at the time, and in fact, I was very open to that kind of, push that he gave me because in fact I was wandering around the Lower East Side with my pencil and paper, talking to people, looking in doorways, just sensing things and writing them down. And I wrote a long poem about just the people and things of that part of the world that to me was so exotic and so thrilling, and yet with which I felt a very powerful kinship. And I'll just read you a couple of bits of that, just to illustrate the difference. This is about the fruit and vegetable market, this section 6, that went along Avenue C between 5th and 7th Street. All disappeared now, of course. In the pushcart market on Sunday, a crate of lemons discharges light like a battery. Icicle-shaped carrots that through black soil wove away lie like flames in the sun. Onions with their shirts ripped seek sunlight on green skins. The sun beats on beets, dirty as boulders in cowfields, on turnips pinched and gibbous from budging rocks, on embery sweets, on Idahos, Long Islands, and Maines, on horseradishes, still growing weeds on the flat ends, on cabbages lying about like sea-green brains the skulls have been shucked from, on tomatoes, undented plum tomatoes, alligator-skinned cucumbers that float pickled in the wooden tubs of green-skim milk, sky flowers, dirt flowers, under-dirt flowers, those that climbed for the sun in their lives, and those that wormed away, equally uprooted, maimed, lopped, shucked, and misaimed. In the market in Damascus, a goat came to a stall where 12 goat heads were lined up for sale. It sniffed them one by one. Finally, 13 goats started smiling in their faintly sardonic way. A crone buys a pickle from a crone. It is wrapped in the mirror. At home she will open the wrapping, stained, and stare and stare and stare at it. And the cucumbers, and the melons, and the leeks, and the onions, and the garlic. So anyway, that's a section from Avenue C, and successful or failure or failed, you can see that my attempt was to really kind of evoke the onions and the cabbages, just as actual things.
The Missing Boy, for ETAN PATZ. Every time we take the bus, my son sees the picture of the missing boy. He looks at it like a mirror, the dark blonde hair, the pale skin, the blue eyes, the electric blue sneakers with flashes of jagged gold. But of course that kid is little, only 6.5, an age when things can happen to you, when you're not really safe. And my son is 7, practically fully grown. Why, he would tower over that kid if they could find him and bring him right here on this bus and stand them together. He sways in the silence, wishing for that. The tape on the picture gleaming over his head, beginning to melt at the center and curl at the edges as it ages. At night, when I put him to bed, my son holds my hand tight and says he's sure that kid's all right, nothing to worry about. He just hopes he's getting the food he likes, not just any old food, but the food he likes the most, the food he is used to. I think the reason that I wrote this poem was that feeling had built up in me from seeing the pictures and from thinking about being kidnapped and suddenly disappearing from your family and your life, seeing it partly through the eyes of someone who was almost the same age as the one who had gone away. Sometimes when I think about people hating poetry or loving poetry, the ones who need it and love it and take such pleasure in it, and the ones who feel it's very far away from them, very distant and outside their world, I think that one thing that it's for, one way that it works in our world together, is when feeling builds up in that way, a feeling of grief, or I think that's why so many poems are about love. I mean poems, not poems in books, the poems that everyone in this room has written. Usually, it's hard for me to find anyone who hasn't either openly or secretly written a poem. In New York, if I take a cab, I will sometimes, they'll say, what do you do? And we'll talk about what I do. And then they'll say, I wrote a poem once. So it seems to be something that, although it's not apparently popular in our world, that people are doing a lot on their own and privately. So I think that was the source of this, was seeing those signs and then wanting to present it partly from the point of view of someone at that age. One thing I notice when I'm reading it is the way that Scotch tape is like an image of what's happening, the way that Scotch tape tapes the picture to the window of the bus, and it gleams with a sense of, that this is significant and important, and then it's getting older, so we didn't know then, and we still don't know what happened to that particular child that this poem was written to. But the tape is a kind of, I think, was my way of trying to think about that in some way. When something bad has happened, is it better to not write about it, to let it, see if it will float away? I don't think it floats away. I think anything that we care enormously about kind of sticks in us in a way. It has its little hooks in us, and that the writing of a poem, often about those enormous events that happen to us all, things that have to do with love, either happy or unhappy on our level, or that have to do with our parents or our sisters and brothers or friends, and with death. Often people will write their first poem impelled by that kind of strong experience that builds up that feeling in us.
It's called Run Before Dawn. I'm up early, and I begin to write. This is what eventuated. Most mornings, I get away, slip out the door before light, set forth on the dim gray road, letting my feet find a cadence that softly carries me on. Nobody is up. All alone my journey begins. Some days it's escape. The city is burning behind me. Cars have stalled in their tracks, and everybody is fleeing like me, but some other direction. My stride is for life, a far place. Other days it is hunting. Maybe some game will cross my path, and my stride will follow for hours, matching all turns. My breathing has caught the right beat for endurance. Familiar trance-like scenes glide by. And sometimes it's a dream of motion. Streetlights coming near, passing, shadows that lean before me, lengthened and fading, and a sound from a tree, an owl or a soul. These journeys are quiet. They mark my days with adventure too precious for anyone else to share. Little gems of darkness, the world going by, and my breath, and the road. Now what I want to get at about this is, without being programmed, I begin to write. I can see how this naturally arises out of my life. I do get up early. Every other morning I go out jogging. But I'm writing along, and then after I'd written it, I suddenly realized, yeah, this is about jogging, but it's also about the other mornings when I set forth on the dim gray road. What's going to come? Familiar trance-like scenes glide by, shadows, and so on. It's what's actually on the page is like an emblem for something that's interior. It's another part of my life. So I'll really come to this pause and see if we have an interchange by affirming that if you let yourself find the trail the way a bloodhound does, where it leads, things that will come to you will relate to your life even if you didn't have the intention to do that.
He graduated from Princeton in 1948, received the Pulitzer in 1970, and he's been acknowledged in every forum and in every way that a poet can in our culture. W.S. Merwin, we're very proud to have you with us.
Thank you, Scott. Some of you have come a long way in the cold this morning. I know it's cold because I've been out in it too. But when you cut down something in excess of a quarter of the trees of the planet in a little bit over 20 years, you can't do that without an immediate effect on the climate. And the other effects are much subtler, and they may even be worse in the long run. Our life depends on variety. We cannot have one species inhabiting the planet. And we're the only species that's ever been around that reached a certain point of control and comfort and then started eliminating all the other species. That's what we're doing. We can't go on that way. I'm telling you this because some of you are quite young, and I want you to get upset about this. I want you to get upset enough about it so that you feel, what can I do about it? I don't know what you can do about it. I know what I'm trying to do about it, and I think it's hopelessly inadequate. I think that what all of the people who are trying to do about it is hopelessly inadequate. But if enough people want to, there's still enough left of the democratic illusion so that if there are enough people who really want to, maybe they can do something. But it's going to have to be done quite fast, and it will have to be done quite drastically. I mean, there's going to have to be, not, maybe by the year 2000 we can limit such and such things so that it won't be happening quite as badly as it is now. That, you can't survive that way. Some of these things are going to have to be stopped completely and quite soon if anybody's going to survive. So get upset about it and find out. Get in touch with the Nature Conservancy. Get in touch with any of the organizations that are trying to do something about it. The rainforest that Scott mentioned, temperate forest, the Hutchinson Forest near New Brunswick, when you see how magnificent, to me that's sort of like Bach. You walk into a place like that and you think, oh my God. Comparisons of this kind don't mean much, except I'm going to do it in terms of numbers. I think in a forest of that kind, you can expect that maybe there'll be at most 300 or 400 species of flora and fauna in maybe a square mile. Would that be fair enough? You get into any piece of rainforest, and the rainforest is not a sort of generic thing that's there. Every bit of rainforest is different. But if you get into a square mile of rainforest, you're talking about species in the many thousands, in the 5 figures, and many of them completely unknown to us. And, at the most immediate and greedy level, these are things that we could use. They're full of medicinal properties. Maybe the cure of cancer is there. They're full of all kinds of things that we could use. But beyond that, we need them for the health of our existence. We can't just sort of wipe these things out. The Minas Gerais rainforest in southern Brazil, there's only 2% of it left. This is a rainforest that was probably the size of the whole of northeastern United States, and that's only one of 4 major rainforests in Brazil. And of course, Brazil doesn't have all the rainforests in South America. The eastern part of Peru and Ecuador and the southern part of Venezuela and Colombia, it's all rainforest. Indonesia is in some ways even worse than Brazil, what's happening, in Malaysia and India and parts of Africa. The destruction and a lot of it is being done for the most stupid and wasteful and immediately greedy reasons, not even just for lumber, and not even just for the much publicized paper companies in Brazil making, grinding up the forest as fast as they can and turning it. A lot of this is, the forest is just being pushed over and burned so that cattle can be grazed in there for 3 or 4 years until the whole nutrients of the ash is washed away, and then you have a decreasing pasture land for maybe 20 years, selling you stuff for the Burger King cheap, and after that, wasteland. So it's a dreadful story. It's one that I think I was told to talk about something that's close to me. This is a subject that I find it hard to get very far from for very long, because I just think one can't talk enough about it. And you may be wondering what it has to do with poetry at this point. I think it has an enormous amount to do with poetry, because I think that poetry is one of the things that it is about, one of the things that it bears witness to and is a manifestation of, is what is left of the faith that we may share in the integrity of the senses and the integrity and the truth of our imagination. Because I think the world of our senses, the experience of our senses, and the world of the imagination are not even connected. They're one. I mean, they're part of the same process. They're part of the same form of existence. And besides that, they are our link with the whole of life. I don't like using the word the natural world, as though there were a natural world and then there was a world which was not natural. There is only one world, and it's the natural world, and we're part of it. We're not standing outside it, deciding whether we're interested in it like a stamp collection, or whether we care about it. If we don't care about it, it's like not caring about our bodies or something like that. Sooner or later, we aren't going to have a body as a result. If we don't care about it, we aren't going to have anything. I think the arts have been, artists get involved in all kinds of funny things, and in status jockeying and games playing and all that sort of stuff. But the authentic impulse in the arts, I believe, has to do with speaking out of this relation with life as a whole. And this is also the link between, as I see it, between the arts and religion, because the arts, there has to be a clear root of compassion in them. I mean, you're speaking out of sympathy with other forms of life. Even if you're speaking in anger, you do it because of caring for something. You don't write out of indifference. It's impossible to paint or to compose music or to choreograph or learn to dance out of indifference. You do it out of caring for existence, your own, and what you share with not just other humans, but every other form of life. And I think that this is something that once you begin to think about it, you keep finding it all through the arts. I think that Renaissance painting, Mozart, all of poetry. I mean, Shakespeare's unthinkable without it. Dante's unthinkable without it. Whitman is unthinkable without it. Whitman I have problems with because I think Whitman was a kind of imperialist, but it was okay to win the West and push all those trees and Indians out of the way.
There once were two ladies from Twickenham, who bought some new shoes to walk quick in 'em. But after a mile, they sat down on a stile and took off their shoes and were sick in 'em. The box elder bug prays. I want so little for so little time, a south window, a wall to climb, the smell of coffee, a radio knob, nothing to eat, nothing to rob, not love, not power, not even a penny. Forgive me only for being so many. One use a practical civilization might make of them. The stripes lift off the backs of box elder bugs in a single house. The stripes lifted off the backs of box elder bugs in a single house in the middle of the North American continent, laid end to end, would make a narrow red highway past the moon. On this road, the poor, the ugly, the sick, the disagreeable could drive away into the universe. He bushwhacks across the gold sweater on the girl reading alone at the desk, at last discovers her breast and goes around and around and around and around, pulling your eye behind him like the weak climber slowly belayed to the summit. He crawls over bristles on the ear of the old man who snores in the pew in front of you, while the sermon slowly vaporizes into the invisible ether of grace and disembodied love. The bug is, on the other hand, still clearly visible. In a house with box elder bugs, you're never lonely. Quiet neighbors who leave whiskey alone don't wake you at night with drunk stories of old girlfriends, lives gone wrong, new poems. Box elder bugs don't pay much attention to whether you get your work done.